So we're going to start off in February. Obviously, the university announced a number of steps, including revoking Beta Theta Pi's recognition, the alcohol ban for Greek life, and a freeze on new member programs. So what specific plans are under consideration to end hazing now, and what concrete steps has Greek life taken since that original announcement?
Good questions about a very complicated and troubling issue. I would correct one thing that you said, Chloe. You said that we have suspended new member programs, the recruitment programs. We've actually simply said that we'd like for each of these groups to submit a proposal to us about how they're going to go forward with those plans and assure us that hazing will not be a part of their activities. And so they're doing that. In fact, the last time I checked, about half of them, I think, had submitted those kinds of plans to the Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life. And we vetted those and approved them, and they're moving forward. So I think we haven't stopped the new member recruitment right now. What we did was really to give us a bit of a pause after what were really tragic events that led to a terrible outcome. The worst thing that can happen to a university community, I think, is for a student to die. Tim Piazza's death is something that really ought to call us all to renewed attention around these issues. So we have held fast to the alcohol moratorium for the time being and all social activities related to the IFC chapters. The new member recruitment, I've already described that to you. And we're considering additional action with Beta. We've so far revoked their recognition for 5 years pending the outcome of our investigation and the criminal investigation downtown, but as late as later this afternoon, I'm meeting with the district attorney and the State College Police to talk about where our investigations are at this juncture, because we work together on these things. And as additional information comes to us, it's likely that we will make some other declarations about Beta. I think it's important that we do so. But in that context, we've really managed to get the attention of the Greek community around how do we do all this better. The idea is not to distance ourselves from these organizations, but instead to ensure that they have the best possible outcomes for themselves and their members. And so I think we're going to have an opportunity in the coming months, really, to talk anew about what the relationship is going to be and how we'll go forward. But I think you'll see a number of levers pulled. I don't think there's one magic way to improve the outcomes here. But I think what we've seen is a real decline in the behavior that we've witnessed in some of these groups, and it's behavior that we can't tolerate and that they shouldn't tolerate for themselves. But if they're going to sustain their recognition from the university, they're going to have to change their ways in some meaningful fashion. For the time being, though, we're just hoping to get through the rest of this semester and let everybody do so in peace and harmony and with full safety and security, if at all possible. That becomes increasingly difficult, I think, frankly, as the weather improves and the social experience sort of gets stirred up a bit more. So I'm hopeful that people will be mindful of the need to manage these behaviors a little bit better than we sometimes have in the past and give us a little space to figure out how we go forward from there.
All right. So it seems that a lot of these same issues keep happening in the Greek life community, or are highlighted, emphasized in the Greek life community, as far as underage drinking in frat houses, sexual assaults reported in frat houses, hazing allegations. So is there anything that would happen where Penn State would shut down Greek life entirely?
Well, I think that's certainly not our intent. It's not an easy thing to do, even if it were our intent. This is a public university. These organizations, like all student organizations, have certain associational rights that are protected by the U.S. Constitution. We'd have to talk about all that. I think that some universities like Penn State have withdrawn recognition from all of their interfraternity council groups, at least. Colorado is the one that comes to mind. I don't think that's the better approach. I think the better approach is to find ways for these groups to actually live up to their ambitions, their missions, the values that they express for themselves, which are generally quite consistent with what we would hope to see them achieve. But you're right, when it comes to underage drinking, excessive drinking, sexual assault, and other kinds of misconduct, they've displayed more than their fair share in every instance. And so that's not at all consistent with who they claim to be or who we want them to be. It's not consistent with the kind of student experience that they and others would like to see us achieve here. So I think that we've allowed them to maintain their principle of self-governance for a very long time, and that's the way they're structured. They're independent of us, they're on private property, and so we want to the fullest extent possible, honor the self-governance, because I think students learn a lot from taking that kind of responsibility. At the same time, I think that we've gotten into a zone where, with our fraternities, for instance, there aren't many upper-class members who are living in these houses. They're mostly the younger members who are living there, and I think that they still perhaps could benefit from some more senior leadership. The men who move out of the houses might instead be in the houses. That could be a good thing. We shouldn't tolerate these houses being safe havens for underage drinking. It has become the case that for students who are not of age and can't drink in establishments downtown, they will over and over again go to fraternity houses for social events there and feel that it's a safe harbor. We can't do that anymore and let that be sustained in the way that it has been. So the self-governance is going to have to be minimized a bit. We're going to intrude a bit more in terms of our expectations, but that's what they're going to have to live with in exchange for the recognition that really is so valuable to them. And if they're going to be meaningful, safe, appropriate, thriving, and sustainable organizations, I think these adjustments are going to have to be made. Otherwise, they'll go away of their own accord, not by way of anything that we would do, because I don't think on the path they're on, they are truly sustainable.
Thank you. And this kind of also goes into the self-governing nature of fraternities that you were talking about, because one of the university statements in February kind of played on that, saying the self-governing nature of these groups requires their participation to affect any change. So how do you juggle the fact that these Greek organizations are on private property and that there's only so much that you can do within the university standards? So where does that line end, and how do you kind of make sure that they're still representing Penn State well under Penn State's umbrella?
Well, it's hard, and I would not say that they're representing Penn State. I know that they do. I know that their behavior and some of the worst incidents, of course, are ascribed to us in various ways. I wouldn't put that on them necessarily. I do view them as independent associations, but they're populated with our students, and we do want that experience to be a safe one, a productive one, something that's consistent with the real purpose that brings these students here, not something that works against it. So we have a vested interest with them in their success, but I'm less worried about how it reflects on the university than the quality of the experience it offers to our students. It's not an easy thing to find where this line is between self-governance and independence and autonomy and our responsibility for ensuring that we've applied our best resources to see that they turn out as well as they can. So it's something that we're going to have to work on, but I think that statement that you referenced where we acknowledged it requires the very active involvement of the undergraduates themselves is absolutely the case. We have national organizations that are involved. We have local alumni groups and other alumni who are involved. Housing corporations are involved. The Borough of State College is involved. We all have a part to play, but no constituency has more to say about the outcomes for these groups than the undergraduates who are living in them and are leading them. Most of the bad things that happen in the wee hours of the morning, and they're not under the supervision of anyone at that time. And I think they're going to have to understand, again, that there are real consequences for failing to maintain a standard of behavior within their organizations themselves. And I predict that if they do recognize that there's real consequence for that failure, that they'll own their responsibility a little bit more and probably be more active and purposeful in the way they address these issues with us.
That's interesting also that you brought up these different groups that are maybe in the area and that can also maybe not influence but feel that they have a say, voice their opinions, and especially alumni. How are alumni coming out, not only for Beta's chapter, but just in general? Are they coming out in support of Greek life? Are they coming out against it? What's your experience been with that?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag even within alumni who themselves were members of these organizations. I have, since Tim's death, I've met with the alumni board leadership for Beta. I've met with a group called the Lions Fraternity Alumni Association. There are about 28 representatives who advise various groups in town. And it's interesting listening to them because they see changes in the Greek system that are not consistent with the experience that they believe they had when they were in these organizations, and they'd like to return to something that's a little more consistent with what their experience was, and they're looking to partner with the university and with their undergraduates to achieve that. But many of them have expressed frustrations because I think they've been living with some of these difficulties and bad outcomes for quite some time. They're very frustrated by it. So I think that it also should be pointed out that many of them are the ones who own these houses, if you're talking about the IFC chapters, so they have a financial interest in all this. They have a liability concern in all of this. They have a lot at stake themselves, but they in the end are part of this community because they believe in the values that are expressed by these groups and they think they can still achieve them. But I think their frustration has gotten to a boiling point in some instances. There's also, when I say it's a mixed bag, there are also alums who will defend the status quo and believe that the university really shouldn't intervene with these groups. And so we have those conversations as well. It's a really polarizing set of questions that we face. It's not unlike the current political climate where you have people at either ends of the spectrum, either very strongly supportive, saying that we shouldn't do anything to change the Greek system, or so unsupportive that they think we ought to just do away with it, or at least abandon our commitment to it. And we'd like to think that someplace in between is where we all need to land, but we need to be working assiduously to get there as quickly as we can.
That actually makes me think, so, because I've heard from friends who are in fraternities that when they have alum come back, they talk about how the social scene is just, like you said, just very different. Like it's almost escalated to a certain point. Mm-hmm. And it seems that things are like students graduate. The students from 2010, I had a quote, but I'll skip past that for now. Like it just seems that students graduate, they learn, a scandal happens within their time, and then these students graduate, and then hypothetically I'm in the time that I've been here, it's been KDR, Tim Piazza. So what could be put in place that almost stops escalation or kind of can like simmer down what trends we've been seeing?
Well, I do think that we have to take advantage of this most recent terrible tragedy to make some statements about what our expectations are, make them very clearly, make clear what the consequences will be for failing in those expectations, and we might see a further winnowing of the number of groups that we have. And I think that as groups start to see, oh, this is real, the repercussions are real, we don't want the whole system to go away, and we'd like to salvage as much of what is valuable in it as we possibly can, then I think that will have an impact. I think anything short of that is probably not going to succeed, but it's very hard to put the genie back in the bottle when it comes, literally the bottle, when it comes to some of the excesses that we're seeing in these groups. And you know, some of the alum will tell you that the social scene has changed, and it has changed, because I can remember my own undergraduate experience ages ago, and it was a very different kind of experience from what I witness now with students. But one thing that isn't really different, that may have been equally bad, if not worse, in the past, was hazing. Hazing was something that people some decades ago sort of looked away from when it happened. There weren't laws in the same way there are now against hazing. And so I think that there are some ways that if you just hearken back to the past, you won't find exactly the model we want to proceed with in the future. So there are some things that we can learn from the past, but we also have to improve upon that past that some of our alumni experienced as well.
Thank you.
Chloe, about 5 minutes and then we'll wrap.
All right. Let me see which one. So in your statement to the IFC board after the KDR scandal, you said Penn State is deeply committed to sustaining a values-based community in which its various constituencies, and their organizations demonstrate respect, responsibility, and integrity. And that was 2 years ago. So from that point forward to where we are now, even with everything that's going on, would you say that they've improved, and how so?
I would not accuse them of improving. It's a frustration for me. I think that it's not fair ever to paint with a broad brush everyone in so many groups and such a great number of people in so many groups. So there are organizations that I'd say have done better than others. But the sad reality is that if I had been asked a month ago to name the top 3 fraternities on campus and tell a parent where they might want to direct their son, it's likely that Beta would have been among those 3. And so, I have some doubts about all of them because of their fundamental nature, which is with these fraternity houses, we have dozens of very young men living together, largely unsupervised, in an environment where some excess with regard to substances and sort of the way people behave today in their social scenes lead to other kinds of problems related to sexual misconduct and a host of things. I have too many examples where things are going awry, and so I haven't seen the kind of improvement I'd like to see, and that nice rhetoric that you accused me of there is not enough to change things. I think we need to, as I said before, create some very clear understanding among us about what the university's expectations are going to be for the continued recognition of these groups and our vast support of them in various ways, and then hold them accountable for those expectations. If they fall short, then we will withdraw recognition of more of these groups until everybody seems to understand what we're trying to achieve collectively or should be.